Uh-oh. Oh my goodness. Can you guys hear me? I haven't been talking. I was trying to make sure that everybody was on. Did you hear me clicking away in the background? Can you hear me? I got my microphone on, so it should be on. Oh, okay. Good. Yeah, sorry, I was just kind of like trying to figure out if I could figure out how to get another link. Yeah, that was weird. I think I accidentally booked this webinar for the wrong time, and it actually doesn't matter on my webinar software. It only, like the other things all say 7 for sure, but I think it actually said 6, and they think it actually expired. So that's not good. But I think I would just give people a minute here to catch up if they figured it out. Sorry about that. Yeah, I can imagine there would be a little tiny bit of anxiety. But you should be able to see my beginning slide. I'm hoping. I know it would have been a bummer if we didn't get to have this webinar booked at this time. It would have taken a little while to rebook it, I think. Oh yeah, you have to copy and paste it. Yeah. Well, we are going to record this. So for some reason, you know, somebody who didn't quite get the email or figure out how to do it, then we will be recording it. So my apologies. Let's just check everything. So obviously you all know that the chat box is there. And, you know, if you want to put a question or a comment as you go along, you know, I'll try and incorporate questions as we go. But if I can't, I'll answer your question at the end. And if you have further questions after this, you're always welcome to contact me. And usually if you do the resonance wellness education at gmail.com address, it's a little bit easier for me. Sometimes other questions get lost in the other inbox, but okay, well, let's just start. And hopefully if there's some people who are going to straggle in, they'll just straggle in. Okay, so hello and welcome to Calm Your Anxiety. My name's Dr. Lissagall, and I'll be your guide this evening about all things fearful. As usual, this presentation is given in the context of the whole life medicine model, which is the model that I use at Resonance when I'm evaluating your healthcare situation. And today we're going to explore the various components of both alleviate and align that can contribute to anxiety. There are definitely some potential causes for anxiety in root causes and in missing ingredients. There can also be anxiety that comes from a need to clean up certain body systems. Anxiety can also be related to finding it difficult to find center. And so we find and align the things that are related to stress patterning and condition programs in the autonomic nervous system and the body's psychoneuroendocrine immunological response. So you've probably heard that term before. It's basically that the psyche, the nervous system, the hormones, and the immunity are all one functioning system. So this is one of the reasons why we can have quite a number of causes to many of our health problems, and anxiety is really no exception to that. So we're going to talk about some of these things today. Now, for those of you that are accustomed to dealing with anxiety, it's really probably going to come to no surprise to you to know that it's one of the most commonly experienced mental illnesses or mental experiences amongst adults in North America. It's thought it's affecting about 18% of the population. And even out of these 18%, probably only about a third of people will ever ask for help with anxiety. And I think that tells us several things. One of these things is that anxiety is obviously experienced by many people, and that it's often minimized or not really recognized for what it is. I've certainly observed that there are patients who you can tell they're anxious when they're in the exam room, and you can find that they actually respond to anti-anxiety herbs or whatever, and they'll completely deny they ever have anxiety. And I think part of it is that we stigmatize not, what's the right expression, quote unquote, not being able to handle life, or however it is that we take a look at it. I mean, we live in a culture where it is considered very valuable to tough things out, to get over our problems, to keep your cards close to your chest. I mean, this really is a culture that aggravates and perpetuates the experience of anxiety. And I think it's probably gotten better, certainly gotten better in terms of awareness in my practice time frame. But certainly there's still a lot of stigma about needing to ask for help, or not being able to find the skills to deal with anxiety. And a lot of people just wait till it's over, kind of quote unquote over, and hope that it never comes back again. But that isn't always the case. But I think we need to do a couple of definitions here. So what is anxiety really, and how is it different from fear or panic? So fear is the basic emotion. We share it with all of the animals in the world. It involves activation of fight, flight, or freeze. Those are responses of the sympathetic nervous system. It is a typical and normal biological reaction to an immediate threat, and it's part of your survival system, and it launches without you really having to think about it. It's what activates when you see an aggressive animal or a human that looks like it wants to hurt you, or if you're getting too close to a moving vehicle, or you're in a moving vehicle they don't think's driven properly, or you're about to drop a glass out of the cupboard and smash it everywhere. It's that reaction your kid is trying to video and they jump out at you in a gorilla mask that they just want to share on social media. We're all familiar with that response. Panic is a fear reaction that occurs in absence of any immediate threat. So you respond as though you're in danger. You go into the full fight or flight response, even when there's nothing obvious around you that reflects that kind of danger. And often when people have panic, or if they have it for the very first time and they've never had it before, they usually think they're having a heart attack and decide to go to the hospital. This is very common. A lot of people who end up in the emergency room, sure they're having a panic, are sure they're having a heart attack, or actually having a panic attack. Now, anxiety is a more complex emotional state. It's a blend of unpleasant emotional sensations that are usually more oriented to the future or anticipated events rather than any immediate threat. So anxiety is about perceived danger. So anxiety as a word is derived from the Latin angere, which means to press together, and angustus, which means narrow. So the anxious person basically becomes pressed together narrowly, or in other words, they become constricted. So we understand what underlies fear and anxiety disorders for the most part in the brain. It's probably something that's better known than almost any other experience mentally, which is fascinating. But probably it's because it has so many applications in protection of systems, and that we can actually study that in animals, not other than humans. So there are a good number of identifiable contributors to anxiety. In my experience, that this top one here, ignoring or suppressing stress, is probably the most important. So, let's just say denial ain't just a river in Egypt. We really just have the most interesting concept of handling stress. It's mostly a strategy of distracting ourselves so we don't notice it, or we're not being honest with ourselves and others about how we're really doing, and thinking that it's normal to be self-medicating with whatever we can find to avoid seeming like we need help. If your brain is talking to you at 11 p.m., it could just be because you really didn't have any time to yourself in the race to your finish of your day. And you didn't really get a chance to kind of sit down and process what's happening to you because you were so distracted doing things. And all of those things that you didn't have time to attend to within the center of your being got shoved towards that last 5 minutes, and then it interferes with your sleep. So that said, there's some things that definitely happen in the body that increase your risk of feeling anxiety that I'm listing here. And when it comes to neurotransmitters, everything affects everything else. There's genetics, there's food, inflammation, stress, sleep habits, exercise, how good your community is, epigenetic factors, which are like lifestyle factors, hormonal factors, mitochondrial function, nutrient levels, toxicity, microbiome issues. Basically, just like everything else that we've talked about in the last couple of years, you can always find elements pulling together to create your overall experience. So let's take a look at some of those factors. Hormonal balance really can affect anxiety, in particular stress. Stress can divert progesterone towards cortisol. So if you're constantly internally engaging the stress systems, you will pull from your hormonal resources, and it changes and imbalances the relative amounts of everything else. Estrogen, DHEA, testosterone, all of these hormones contribute to your mood, and they can impact the health of the brain. For example, DHEA protects new nervous system tissue from getting destroyed by stress hormones. So if you don't recuperate from your stress, you kind of start to create this perpetuating cycle of creating problems with neurological function. So stress is a major precursor to anxiety, and often supporting a healthier stress response is actually going to fade the tendency towards anxiety. Now, there's a couple things that you should know. Low hydration activates the stress system. So I'm sure most of you have heard me harp about being hydrated. Remember that the adrenal gland is actually responsible for electrolyte balance in your body. And so if you don't do a super great job of balancing your water and electrolytes, it's not uncommon to actually start to engage the stress systems. And it's a very, very easy fix. I've actually had people where this was the entire cause of the anxiety. They just had no fluids going in them. And when a person has too much stress, obviously sleep is typically affected, and that can amp up the anxiety. It's well known that increased REM sleep can decrease anxiety. So if you actually have proper sleep with all the phases, you get an extended and uninterrupted sleep, it will decrease anxiety. So using things that support the stress gland could be really important for balancing of anxiety. And a lot of the time, especially when it's generalized anxiety, I will often start there with somebody, or at least put that in the initial plan, because having stress support often will just help your adrenal gland be a little bit more resilient and a little less trigger happy when there's certain things that go wrong, either physically or in life. Now, oxytocin, which is another hormone, it's more of a peptide hormone. If you increase that, you'll improve anxiety as well. And this is the hormone of bonding. So you can increase oxytocin by doing things like getting massage or hugging your family, anybody that you're not supposed to get close to for COVID reasons. Cooking and eating a meal actually increases your oxytocin. So you can think about your mealtime prep times as anxiety decreasing timeframes. Physical activity, which we're going to talk more about in a second, as a bigger factor, but it actually increases oxytocin. And then also getting involved in something community or family oriented. Too much stress often decreases thyroid function as well. So you become not just anxious, but exhausted and anxious with a slowed down digestion. And actually the slowed down digestion is our next factor. So your digestion is a key component to keeping you healthy. There is a huge surface area in your gut. It is highly innervated. It's the place where the digestive processes should be giving you all the tiny pieces that you need for building, and it's the place where all the waste should be secreted properly. It has a highly organized microbial colony that's super essential to those functions. It's essentially a microbiome gut-brain axis, and research has shown that its health is substantially relevant to psychological behaviors. Poor digestion, poor dietary choices are very big stressors to the nervous system. You literally are feeding all of the information about your gut function right into your central nervous system, and sometimes the message received is a major stressor. So most of your own neurotransmitters are in your guts, and to add to that, microbes generate neurotransmitters and inflammatory molecules, which in the same way as the nervous system feedback is happening, you can basically reach the brain and impact behavior with inflammatory microbial molecules. So gut bacteria are really intricately linked with our brain via the nervous system, the spinal cord, the hormones, and the immune system. The vagus nerve is the main communicator between these, and it's transmitting neurotransmitters from the base of the spine, conveniently located near guts, right to the brain. So, your brain has its own immune system as well. So inflammation and inflammation signaling can really affect the brain and mental health, because it doesn't really matter where the inflammatory signal comes from. If it ends up in the brain, it doesn't matter that it started out in your gut. It's going to have an impact on the brain. So in addition, the liver is going to require supplies from the digestion. That has a very big impact on how well you can handle normal and ingested toxins. That includes the things that are normally produced by your microbiome. It includes caffeine, which by itself can create anxiety if you have too much of it or if you can't break it down properly in the liver. Some people get anxiety from a cup of coffee because they're not really great, detoxifiers. And caffeine clearance is actually the first step in liver detoxification. So if you don't do coffee well, there are many, many other things that are not going well in your liver. It isn't just you're sensitive to coffee. It's that your phase 1 detoxification is not good. Slow digestion can also really mess with things with blood sugar control. It super increases stress hormones that aggravate anxiety. And like I said before, you need fluids to transport all of the ingredients of normal neurotransmitter production, of normal cell function, to come out of the digestion and with appropriate fluid movement, get to the brain. So if you suspect that your guts are part of your anxiety, there's a handful of tests we can do to see how big of an impact that has. We can rule out microbiome problems or leaky gut or allergies or celiac. Ruling out food sensitivities isn't a bad idea if you have a suspicion, because the more things that you eat that are bothering you, the more inflammatory factors you have. And that doesn't mean that it has to be like that permanently forever, unless for some reason you're anaphylactic to something. But it takes a lot of energy to really digest things well. And it takes actually the highest aspect of yourself. It really takes that I am being in you. So the spirit being in you is the thing that really digests. It's a very difficult process. It's not just like a mechanical, pit in there. There's a lot of coordination. I mean, it's so remarkable. I mean, I think I might have used this quote before, but Steiner once said that if every time you digest, it's kind of like the same as if you want to know what time it is, completely disassembling and reassembling your watch. That's how amazingly complex it is. So if you're struggling in life to know where the center of yourself is, you're also not going to have a great digestion, which is probably going to contribute. It's also estimated that 2/3 of people who are newly diagnosed with celiac will report very significant anxiety, and it responds to the elimination of gluten. So I don't know if any of you have had that experience, even with gluten intolerance, but this is not an unusual experience for people who are learning that they actually have a fairly major reaction to something. And this is all important, because it just further supports that what we put into our bodies really affects the way our minds work and the feelings of positivity and negativity we experience. It really supports the theories surrounding certain foods and their benefit or their disadvantage of promoting happiness and decreasing anxiety. So you can help your anxiety just by feeding yourself well. Now, this is another major contributor to anxiety, and this is a little bit of a roundabout thing we're going to talk about here. So, mitochondria are cell organelles that are responsible for producing energy for all bodily functions. And this is a beautiful colored version. I'm pretty sure they're not green, but I thought it was a kind of a cool picture. It kind of shows you really what the structure of it is. And research is showing that mood disorders and psychiatric disorders may be produced by poor mitochondrial function. So mitochondria perform the final steps of your oxidative metabolism, which is in essence how you make energy from food. And this is very important for mood. There are lots of mitochondria in nerve cells. The production of cell energy keeps the nerve membranes polarized and ready to signal. In nerve cells, poorly functioning nerve membranes means poor capacity to signal. Also, nerve cells create a lot of reactive oxygen species during like normal neurotransmission. And one of the theories as to why this is increasing brain function problems or mental perception of anxiety is that a decrease in that fuel molecule that you get at the end, which is called ATP. If you don't have enough of that, your cells can die. And so you basically create oxidative stress. So there's a kind of free radical damage to the cell components and to DNA, and then this inhibition of the ion pumps that are keeping that nerve membrane polarized. And then you see this breakdown in the capacity to signal. So studies have shown that in OCD, people have far higher levels of markers of oxidative stress, depleted glutathione. We talked about that in brain function in the concussion lecture recently, and depleted antioxidants like vitamin E and C. Those are things that protect against oxidative damage. So there's in concussion, we talked about how brain damage and impaired brain function is caused by this cascade of events ending in massive oxidative damage. And what they're finding is that it's kind of like you're getting that in not a trauma-oriented, like not in a catastrophic head trauma way, but in kind of like a slow, steady, or sometimes not even steady, like variable, like up and down. Like a lot of the time you'll see that in the course of somebody who has more serious mental illness, the course is not level. Like they aren't always the same with those symptoms all the time. And you won't be the same with your anxiety all the time either. It'll kind of go in a, an up and down sort of wave. And so these are the cell components that are probably at the root of that. Now, there's lots of things that create problems with mitochondria. Stress is one of them. Again, because you're just adding more demand to the system. You can get direct activation of this by adrenaline, by toxins, whether they're internal, external, doesn't matter. Low blood sugar, because your mitochondria have to work harder to keep the energy levels up. Low nutrients, inflammation, all of those contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction and premature cell death. And like I said, it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. So there also are things that will potentially make mitochondria paralyzed. Heavy metals, pesticides, PCBs, certain kinds of pharmaceutical drugs, mycotoxins. If you do too restrictive a diet for too long, like it's been shown that if you do too strict a keto diet for too long, it'll contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction as well, especially if they were not otherwise healthy. So when we do metabolic typing, what we're actually trying to do for you is figure out how do you feed the system so that the fuels that are coming into those steps of oxidative metabolism are done as efficiently as you can do it, because there are different strengths and weaknesses between people about what sort of fuels actually seem to work the best for some people. Now, there are two physiological paths to anxiety. So both pathways start from sensory information coming through the thalamus. So the thalamus is not labeled here, and I'm just trying to remember if I can turn the whiteboard on. Let me just try. Just want to see if I can show it to you. So this here is actually where the thalamus is. Can you see that? So sorry, it's not labeled here. Sometimes it's really hard to find brain diagrams that meet my criteria. So that structure in the middle is right through the midbrain. About 98% of your sensory input travels from all parts of your body and brain into that spot. Actually, everything but smell. Smell actually enters directly in the brain, and this is kind of, you're going to have to imagine this a little bit. I'll try and draw you a little diagram. So I'm a really bad drawer, sorry. So if this is this is bad drawing. It's actually not showing this very well. But at the top of the nose, there's a very, very thin piece of the skull here. And your little olfactory nerve fibers come from your brainstem, actually, which I'm not going to draw, but it is literally right here at the top of your brain, and then they feed into the system. So this is actually an independent input, which is kind of cool. But one path, so there's two paths through the thalamus. One path travels from the thalamus through the detail focus circuit of the cortex. So particularly the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is labeled here. Just going to take this away. It's labeled here in purple. And it eventually gets the amygdala, which produces the anxiety. So the amygdala here is in red. And the other path runs directly from the thalamus to the amygdala. And remember where I drew that structure in the middle, that's a much, much shorter pathway. One basically goes through your higher protocol, and one goes through your instantaneous protocol. So the direct amygdala path represents a kind of bottom-up triggering of the emotions. So it uses a pre-programmed response from when you learned the fear originally. It's very fast. It doesn't involve your thinking processes at all. And this is one of the hardest things for people to accept, is that they're not in control of these experiences. You're not in control of these experiences because they're totally automated on the one hand. Now, you can unlearn some of the triggers using your conscious mind. But when this happens, it's not something that you can put the brakes on immediately. So fight, flight, and freeze, as I said before, are the amygdala responses, and everybody is wired to let that amygdala control the brain when you perceive danger. The amygdala is very sensitive to biological trauma, so meaning trauma occurring from an event in time, and it responds very quickly to a repeat in the feeling or perceptions that are close to what you've already experienced. It's literally a conditioned response. It attaches a charge to certain types of memories associatively. So the amygdala can make certain pairings of conditions into triggers for anxiety without any conscious thinking on your part. And then sometimes the trigger, when you get triggered, you can realize you're being triggered, but you don't actually know what it was that your physiology saw or sensed that launched you into that repeat pattern. Most of us are just not that observant, I think. If it was possible, if you could slow it all down, I think sometimes you would be able to figure out what it was precisely. Now, the top-down process is where the information from the thalamus is reaching the cortex of the brain. You can process the information before activating the amygdala to produce anxiety. The cortex actually can also produce images or thoughts in the complete absence of sensory input. So you can actually activate the amygdala with your own internal images or thoughts and produce anxiety. That means you can actually think your way into anxiety. And I think lots of people have had that experience if they've already had anxiety. And again, it's just a question of learning how you can change that anxiety response. So those mechanisms can be retrained, like I said. So neuroplasticity is the ability of your brain to change its structure and how it responds. You can change how it perceives what's going on. You can retrain your amygdala and your conscious cortical responses in a number of different ways. The amygdala actually needs to feel to learn. So approaches which suppress your feelings are not going to help long term. And many medications actually impair the brain's ability to learn to do things differently. So some interventions have immediate effects on the activation of the amygdala, and they're very simple to do. A great example is diaphragmatic breathing, like the breathing that's utilized in yoga, that can really calm anxiety. So in anxiety, people often hyperventilate and they have no idea they're doing it. All they know is they have symptoms in their chest where they feel tight and they can't breathe. And we have a whole sheet of breathing exercises on the Essential Handouts page on Whole Life Medicine to help you reverse this phenomenon and calm the activation. And usually, if you have that tight-chested, I can't breathe with anxiety feeling, you can get it under, wraps in about 5 minutes or so. So if you don't have that sheet, I hope you go over and take a look for it after this. Aerobic exercise is like a reset. So in exercising, you are literally running from the tiger. It takes about 20 minutes of exercise to reset it. But if you can do that, it will create calm. And it can also be preventative. So changing the general level of exercise will also change the general level of what it's going to take to activate anxiety. Now, we also have discussed before, and we will discuss, I think, next month in more detail because we're going to do heart lecture next month. We've talked about heart math, and some of you have had the opportunity to use heart math techniques in the office, or you've gotten your own little heart math, heart rate variability dongles to track your progress. You can actually train yourself to be substantially less activated in the sympathetic nervous system. And it is a beautiful technique that doesn't just calm you down, but when you're really good at it, it actually calms all the people around you down as well. So where there's it's not uncommon for people and families to kind of share that kind of base running anxiety. But if one of you can start to create that calmness and shift into rest, digest, and heal, which is parasympathetic, most people will actually entrain with that as a stronger signal, especially if they trust you and they know you well. Now, longer term, sometimes you have to be brave enough to expose yourself to your anxiety-provoking trigger to really produce a lasting change in the amygdala programming. So exposure is actually staying in the presence of a situation or object or thought or emotion and experience it or imagine it and really allow yourself to experience the charge. And if you can do this, you can train your brain to tolerate it. You can use the tapping techniques I've been teaching to you all for the past 20 years. It works best, though, if you activate it first. It's a very powerful therapeutic tool. Avoiding a stressor is not typically a good plan. It really preserves the current wiring and response. And like I said, medication can also inhibit rewiring. You don't just have a deficiency of neurotransmitters. This has really been debunked. It was a popular hypothesis. It's often used as the justification for drug treatment. But the brain can change every single day, and you yourself can help to make those changes. Now, when you're doing this kind of, if you have a really significant anxiety problem, you want to work with somebody that you trust. You need to feel understood. And it really gives you a significant advantage in anxiety treatment all by itself if you trust the person that's helping you. And, when you're making goals and treating anxiety, getting rid of all anxiety may not be possible. Fear is, like I said, a basic emotion, and sometimes it just transfers into anxiety. But you don't want the kind of anxiety where you can't catch yourself and come back to center, or where you feel like it's actually inhibiting normal life. Anxiety is part of survival. It keeps you safe. You just don't want extreme anxiety or panic attacks. But you need to be able to experience the anxiety in order to change it. So let's talk about the use of pharmaceuticals. If you or somebody that you know well has been prescribed drugs to help, quote unquote, fight anxiety, you'll know that medication only has varying levels of success in combating these kinds of symptoms. About 65% of those diagnosed with anxiety take prescribed drugs daily. It's quite interesting to consider this large percentage of people who take the drugs, really given the statistics that show that only about 10% of those who are suffering are really receiving what would be considered adequate pharmaceutical treatment in terms of symptom control. And do the drugs work? They can. They can make things a certain amount better. So as an example, the SNERIs have an effect size of about 2.25. That means if you use this class of drugs, you'll be about 2.25 times as likely as someone who doesn't use it to have a reduction in your anxiety. So those drugs are like the Cymbalta, the Effexor, the Prestique. Lots of people are on those combo drugs. They affect both serotonin and noradrenaline. Now, for benzodiazepines like Valium or Xanax or Ativan or Lyrica, it's about 2.15. For just the plain SSRIs like Paxil or Zoloft, Lexapro, Celexa, it'll be about 2.09. For the tricyclic antidepressants, one of the most common that people use here is amitriptyline. It's about 1.83. But just a placebo alone will be 1.29. So just doing something will improve anxiety in almost 30% of people. That gives you a sense of how modifiable it probably is. If you develop a mindfulness process, it's 1.56 by itself. Relaxation, just relaxing on the couch is 1.36. It's a tiny bit above placebo. Cognitive therapy is about 1.3. It's not the hugest at decreasing anxiety. And exercise is 1.23. So there is a place for drugs. They're useful when people are not functioning, they can't work, they can't take care of their families or themselves. But they do come with other effects because the change in anxiety perception is not equivalent to a change in the underlying anxiety. So what these drugs mostly do is they don't allow your brain to perceive the feeling. And that is, like I said, great if the feeling is so overwhelming you can't function. But it is not great when you're trying to retrain your thalamus. So, and they have big side effect issues, like in the SNRIs, like the Cymbaltas, you can get quite bad digestive issues from that. You can get insomnia from that, which perpetuates anxiety anyways. You can get headaches and libido changes, blood pressure increases. With the benzodiazepines, they have big dependence issues, and people will often be very tired using those, and they can have nightmares. They can have balance issues because they feel too woozy. The SSRIs also are implicated in insomnia and headaches and rashes and low libido. They also have an increased suicide risk affiliated with them. The TCAs amitriptyline doubles your non-Hodgkin's lymphoma risk. It also increases your MI risk. So it's a bit scary. And according to the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry, people who are using anti-anxiety medication have a 36% increased mortality risk during the time that they're on them. And that is very significant, and we should not ignore it. And again, there are times and places for these drugs. They just aren't always the answer for everyone all the time. Now, one of the most dominant contributing factors can be diet. So in terms of anxiety, there's certain foods that can accentuate and potentially relieve the symptoms of that. So some foods that definitely increase the severity of anxiety, like we talked about before, was caffeine. Refined sugar, like high fructose corn syrup in particular, has been shown to do this. Even some fruits, hydrogenated oils, so damage things. So along the lines of reactive oxygen species that are, there's damaged things that your body then has to take in and also deal with the fact that it's a damaged fat. So when you take it in, your body's taking in a fuel, but it's also taking in a toxin. Fast food definitely can increase the severity of anxiety. Sometimes high sodium does, especially if you're not a good water drinker. Trans fats have been shown to increase the severity of anxiety. Sometimes soy products will do that, depending on your sensitivity. Alcohol can do it, probably in part because it lowers your psychological threshold and also dehydrates you. And removing gluten has been shown to improve like really significant illnesses. And like I was telling you before, if people have a celiac diagnosis, they often have anxiety. Removing gluten has been shown to improve bipolar and schizophrenia. So while some of these are obviously more obvious, like they can be really stressful to the system that might already be in precarious balance, which might be one of the reasons why you have a little bit of anxiety in the first place. So there are things to consider pulling out. Now, it is possible to eat things that actually improve anxiety. So foods rich in B vitamins and antioxidants, so real food, and omega-3 fatty acids. That's vital for our brains to function properly and regulates hormone release. So things like wild salmon and walnuts and flax seeds and chia seeds. Also, blueberries have been shown to help anxiety, almonds, spinach, broccoli, spirulina, raspberries, dark chocolate, quinoa, and red lentils. So a lot of those actually fall into the category of superfoods. So most people have heard that term already, but they're just simply foods that have higher levels of beneficial nutrients and minerals and vitamins. And so they're just a nice source of anxiety reducing nutrients. So especially with people who don't do a great job at diet, improving the diet can make a huge difference. Now, of course, you've seen this wheel that it's really hard to see it. I had to make it a little bit small up in the top corner there, but that is the wheel of the healthiest diet on earth. For the vast majority of people, it's a half a plate of non-starchy vegetables and a quarter plate of fat, good quality proteins and oils, a percentage point of ferments, a percentage point of salts and seaweeds, and about 12% fruits and 12% starches and like grainy starches or starchy vegetables. So that if you just ate like that, most people would do a lot better in life. And it's not hard. Just constantly add vegetables to your plate wherever you can and flip it into this proportion. Get a plate, draw it on your plate, and just make sure that in a day it looks like that. Now, sometimes too, if people have blood sugar problems and they notice their anxiety at night, eating a little bit before bed, like eating oats for lots of people, if you can tolerate oats, or turkey, or taking a tryptophan supplement, a couple grams before bedtime, that can also improve anxiety when there's some issues with your digestion that are not being compensated for, and it gives you a little anxiety because you're running low fuel at night. Now, you can also use essential oils. We already did a course on essential oils. I think it was the year before last now. And essential oils contain all these tiny aromatic molecules. They easily pass through the blood-brain barrier. They have an almost instantaneous effect on the areas of the brain that are associated with stress and anxiety and panic and even depression. And like we said before, the smell is the one sense that's not gated. It doesn't go through the amygdala, and it can have an immediate impact on the amygdala without triggering without being triggered. So there's a handful of essential oils that have very significant anti-anxiety effects, but they're not the ones I think that you would probably think of. The first one is angelica. It's not a very common essential oil, I think, to find retail except for at an aromatherapy shop. But angelica has a very powerful anti-anxiety effect. There's also the citruses, so the petitgrain, the neroli, the bergamot, and the mandarin oils are all very good for anxiety. There's also pelargonium. So the common name for that is geranium, but not all geranium essential oils are the same. So it's actually the pelargonium version of geranium. And also marjoram, the essential oil from the spice. So those are really excellent anxiety ones. And Linda's just asking me if I could repeat the essential oils. It's actually up online if you want to still take the course. I just won't be there live, but you can learn all of the things. So just as a reminder, essential oils are extremely versatile and they can be used in a lot of different ways. You can just inhale them directly. In our house, we have bedside little aromatherapy diffusers, or we can put it on our pillows, or you can rub a couple drops of oil into your temples or wrists or anywhere really. You can put some on a handkerchief and stick it in your pocket and just sniff it. Or you can put it in the shower. Just put a couple of drops in your shower, like maybe just plug the drain and put them in the bottom, and then it'll just kind of diffuse into your shower. And then you might have noticed I have a very fancy ionic diffuser in the office. I use like a viral killing blend in the office. So lots of people have asked me, what is that? I'm like, that is my like best way of killing viruses in this room. So you can always do that as well. If it makes you anxious that COVID might be floating in the air, you can use essential oils for that. Now, nature and the environment, being out in nature, as long as somebody feels safe, like you're not in a forest that you don't know where you are, is an antidote for stress. It lowers blood pressure, it lowers stress hormone levels, it reduces nervous system arousal, and enhances immune system function. It increases your sense of self. It literally reduces anxiety and improves your mood. And it can be relieved within minutes of exposure to nature. They've actually measured this with muscle tension, blood pressure, brain activity. Within minutes, people calm down. So time in green spaces really significantly reduces stress hormones like cortisol, and they boost endorphin levels and dopamine production, and that just makes you feel happier. And getting your feet in contact with the ground has also been shown in some studies to help anxiety. This is kind of the premise behind the grounding mats a little bit as well. But the best way of doing this is to actually get your feet on the ground. It's a little hard in Calgary in this moment. But if you just get out in nature, you don't even need to do that part of it until summer. There's a super strong link also between plasma vitamin D and anxiety. So full body, minimal redness dose of summer sun will actually produce about 20,000 international units of vitamin D per hour. So this is why we say try and go out in the summertime at the height of day, and you actually store that. You don't have to do that all the time. Yes, we know that the sun is not as strong in the wintertime, but you can produce this and store it. So spend lots of time outside. Now, the place where an anxious person lives or where they work, the people they surround themselves with is also part of the environment, and it does work as a contributing factor to heightened levels of anxiety. And the trouble is that lots of people who struggle with anxiety don't even think about their environment as a factor to their suffering. And then they start blaming themselves as opposed to like external contributing factors. I've actually found that many people are anxious when their homes are not their sanctuaries. So a messy, unorganized house is often a contributing cause to anxiety, especially, in moms who are responsible for lots of things already. And then they have to also try and manage the collective stuff of many individuals and all of those other pieces. And so where your home is not your sanctuary and things are not found reliably and there aren't peaceful places and it isn't clean and it doesn't smell good, it can be a problem. One of the things actually that's so amazing is my son's friends come over to our house, and they've always said how nice it smells in our house because we always have like essential oils going and something, or we have like incense sticks every once in a while. We spray sweetgrass when we feel like it. It's just we're really attending to that, how things are and how it smells in our environment. And people really appreciate that when they come into our house. Sometimes I think we don't even barely notice it anymore, but other people point it out to us. Now, because we're spending so much time indoors, especially during winter, that importance of that positive environment inside is really accentuated. So, like I said, spend time outdoors, but also have a good internal environment. Now, activity also, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that exercise and keeping active is a very effective way of preventing the onset of a lot of things, not just anxiety and depression, but exercise is a pretty invigorating and effective way to combat periods of anxiety or stress or depression. And it can be used in the moment if you feel up to it, because you can get endorphins produced after even a short 10-minute walk. That's similar to having aspirin for a headache. That's how much of that is released. So it's been proven scientifically to elevate mood And more physically active people also show lower instances of anxiety and depression. And like I said, if somebody is really in that state where they feel like they need drugs, like it's not quite as strong as a drug, but it's getting there. There have been countless studies done for this. It concludes that even moderate to light exercise will be fine for optimal functioning and balanced mood. There was one study I saw of 156 people that after 10 months, the exercise group had a significantly lower anxiety relapse rate than those in a medicated group, which is interesting. So over the long haul, not in the short haul, and not in a panic attack maybe, but over the long haul, exercise might be better. And you can also stimulate mitochondrial numbers by exercising. So in 4 months of exercise, you can increase mitochondria by another probably 2/3. So almost, like doubling your population, getting close to doubling your population with moderate exercise. And of course, that just gives you more energy. So this thing where exercising actually gives you more energy is true for that reason. And it also gives you more capacity to help to compensate for things that you need to repair. So it doesn't really matter what kind of exercise. It just depends on like what is it that you like. Don't do something you hate. Don't run if you can't stand it. I will never personally run anywhere. Only because I don't enjoy it. I will run after a ball. I will run after a soccer ball. I will run after a badminton thing, but I will not run in a straight line anywhere. So just pay attention to what you enjoy. There's no medal for doing an exercise you hate. Now, yoga and meditation are both activities that can improve and assist in accessing kind of a flow state, really. And when you learn how to engage your body in a state of internal focus, either if it's in the form of the physical postures or the breathing techniques, or just directing your awareness to your thoughts and emotions, you begin to access more of what's going on with you. And sometimes in the beginning, that's not very comfortable, but it gives you an opportunity to actually do that kind of review with yourself, as opposed to, like I said before, leaving it till 11 p.m. So if you get that focus and awareness sustained over some time, it really can create this beautiful state in the human mind. So as a consequence, anxiety and stress tend to be less because you're promoting a sense of ease and well-being and connectedness to your own self. It's not really the physical fitness part, although yoga, depending on how you do it, can be quite beneficial and actually improve the cardiovascular system and all of those things. But when you learn how to go within, it really can help you to identify, where is this feeling coming from? And do I remember where it came from? And can I use some of the techniques that I've learned to focus in on that piece to be revised? Now, of course, there's also herbal and nutritional support. And there's several supplements that can be quite useful in general for anxiety. And I tend to use these to help people realize that they have way more control than they realize. And they usually just stop using them naturally over time because they forget they had anxiety. And so theanine supplements like Compro or GABA supplements like GABA Pro, those are the two chewables that I like to use. Or Neuropass, which is St. John's wort and valerian and passiflora. They're great examples of things that can really improve anxiety. In particular, when you use Compro or GABA Pro, you can terminate a panic attack with that. So it's really nice, especially if people are just learning how to work with an anxiety condition, learning that you can actually calm that response down fairly quickly is such a good learning and lesson, because you realize it isn't life-threatening. There isn't anything super wrong with you. It's just some anxiety. And not only that, but you can learn to turn it around. So if you start to get overwhelmed, you can fish out a chewable and chew it up, and in a few minutes, all of a sudden be like, oh, okay, there I am again. And Neuropass is similar to that. I call those the blue chill pills, and all of those are quite safe in all ages. We've used it from children to seniors. And if you use them, especially during activations, you will find that, again, what you're doing is you're training yourself that you can respond in a way to calm yourself down. And so I think this is one of the reasons why people use and then they kind of forget that they had anxiety, and it gives them some space to work on the thing that actually provoked it in the first place. You can also use Neurogen. Sometimes if people have nervous exhaustion with anxiety, that's that syrup that we use in the morning. And the adaptogens that really help stress response are another great category of useful supplements. Like I said earlier, you might be familiar with GSF or TAD or Adrena plant, which is a mix of adaptogenic herbs. All of those will typically improve anxiety, especially when somebody is really getting anxiety flares from stress. Rhodiola as an herb, that's one of the ones that's an Adrena plant, but just by itself, it actually create significant improvement of generalized anxiety disorder. If there's gut issues and inflammation, along with diet changes, I might use something like berberine or curcumin or chromium if there's a blood sugar issue. If I suspect the energy is low and mitochondrial function is low, I would probably use things like multivitamins with multi-B vitamins. We'll talk about that in a sec. And lysine, glutathione, NAC, CoQ10. Also depends a little bit on the metabolic type of the person. Sometimes we can be more particular than that. And the odd time, we might use, especially if the digestion has been poor for a long time and you're missing a lot of like little factors to make things with, I'll use neurotransmitter support, like the lysine or like mucuna that helps you make dopamine, or 5-HTP or SAMe. I use those less because I find that they're kind of work best in people who just don't do a really great job at picking up all those pieces. And some people will notice it otherwise, but not as nicely as the ones that calm you down and calm your amygdala down. B vitamins, you do have to be careful to eat B vitamins. They are some of the most happy hormone inducing foods of all. You just need to make sure that you eat green vegetables, please. So asparagus, spinach, avocados will help you with cortisol. You can also find B vitamins and folate in the meats and the other like leafy greens in legumes and oranges, eggs, nuts. And the effects of the B vitamin will vary depending on how extreme the anxiety is. So if you're having acute anxiety, you're not going to have as much success immediately with B vitamins, but it's definitely worth trying if you're having long-standing anxiety that doesn't seem to be responding to anything. Because B vitamins, in essence, are cofactors in your metabolism. So most people don't understand this, that B vitamins don't go in and have an action on their own. They're not like drugs. They actually attach to your metabolic enzymes and make them more or less efficient. So if you have an enzyme that really requires B6 and B12, as an example, and you don't have enough B6 and B12, that part of your metabolism doesn't run very well. And so this could be another reason why people don't have great mitochondrial function as well, is that they just eat things that they actually can't process and they don't have the right nutrient blend for them. So it's something to think about. Now, there's lots of psychological tools that we can use for anxiety. And some of them are just like, there's some generalized anxiety disorder techniques that can be really useful. So, where you're worrying about worrying versus panic, right? So all the worries. So you can plan a worry time. Just make a list of all your worries and just literally plan some time, sit down and do it for like an hour or two a week. It sounds counterintuitive, but planning a time to actually sit down and like literally write down all of your worries actually helps put a boundary around the worry. And so you can go, oh, no, I can think about that. I'm going to think about that and put it on my list for Thursday at 9 a.m. when I'm going to have my worry time. If you are a kind of person who tends to have 62 worries at any point in time, it's extremely useful. Because then once you have them written down, you can divide them into things you can or can't control. So you can write actions for the things you can control. And you can decide how to use your energy that you've been using on things you can't control on the ones that you can. So like a great example of that would be, I feel anxious because my house is not clean and it's not a pleasant environment. Well, there's easy ways of putting a to-do list around that. But if sometimes you need to sit down and really figure out what those things are. And you can break down big things. I mean, you can't have your house perfect by tomorrow, but you can break it into more manageable steps, or you can delegate. I appreciate delegation. And then figure out what self-care things you can do to support yourself when you're doing the steps. You can also mind map. So start with a central topic that you're always worried about, and then write out the other pieces of that one around it, connected to it until you can't find any more. And then just let yourself see the connections, because there might be something that you realize after doing a list like that that's really not, that you really are figuring out where the anxiety is coming from. Sometimes your anxiety is coming from the fact that in your relationship that's not going well. Sometimes it's a job that's not going well. Sometimes there's something you feel like is internally wrong with you, even if that's not true, and you just worry yourself into a circle about it. So you can also be a bit response preventive, so if you have checking behaviors, like where you're always checking your phone, you can put it in a drawer for 20 minutes and put the timer on the stove and put your phone away for 20 minutes if it makes you anxious to check it. There's a lot of people who get anxious by checking social media. We've already talked about the breathing techniques. And like I said, those are very useful in the moment if you start to feel a little bit jumpy. And then we also talked a bit about exposure. So basically going into a situation or thinking about a stressor and then using a neutralizing technique like breathing or like tapping. And then there's also the potential for going back to the original thing of listing your emotions, figuring out how likely something is to happen. Because, sometimes people will worry about something that has a very, very low risk of happening. And actually researching how likely it is to happen can also sometimes help. When you know that thing that you're so concerned about maybe will happen like once in 10 years in Canada, then you'll be like, okay, so I could still be that one person, in the 10 years in Canada, but probably not. I hope that gives you a couple of ideas. Now, you can also try to engage your own creativity. So if you can get into a state of creative or productive focus, and you intensely concentrating while you're completing a task, you actually do decrease anxiety. And so sometimes I think also people are anxiety because they actually don't have anything fruitful to do. And it has to be cultivated. You have to learn how to find your flow to ensure that your mood and your sense of clarity don't dip too low. It really can help you to avoid anxiety and stress and maintain productivity if you know what you can engage with creatively. It can be things like reading a book. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. It can be, doing a craft. It can be journaling. You don't have to have a creative job to do that. You just want to redirect energy towards something that you enjoy, that you find engaging. And, there's lots of people at this point that have no hobbies whatsoever. And it's important to have some. They're not useless. They are very important to your mental health. Okay, so I think we're at the end. So these are the 4 lectures we still have planned for this webinar series cycle. So next month is going to be heart health. And hopefully I will see you all there. I certainly enjoy so much seeing you here. I love that you guys all show up so often and even come even when the link is broken and figure out what to do. That was awesome. Thanks for that. And of course, if you have any other questions or you want additional information, if you're a patient of resonance, don't hesitate to reach out anytime. Now, is there any questions I can answer besides the essential? I saw Rui came in late, so if I am recording it, I'll probably have it up like in the next couple of weeks. It takes me a little bit of time. It's been a little bit of a busy week. I still have one more presentation to do this week, not for patients, for doctors. Thoughts on CBD oil? CBD oil and a lot of those things are dissociative. So when you dissociate from your feelings, it is relieving temporarily, but it is actually opposing action to how to address it. So again, if somebody is in a lot of trauma and needs to be a bit dissociated from the trauma, that's one thing. But it is not the greatest thing for long-term use, is my personal opinion. Yeah. And is there a time limit for a child to be taking Neuropass? No, not really. That is a standardized herbal product. It's very safe. It's been used for a long time. And if you want to start, which are the things to change first? Claudine, I think if you can kind of identify like whatever strikes you from the areas of this presentation, just start there. You know, like if you feel like you're just anxious and you need some relief, sometimes that can be like just using Compro or Gabapro. And yeah, if you have a child showing repetitive anxiety behaviors, your children under the age of 7, your children are just reflecting you. So if you can calm yourself down, they typically will follow suit. If they see the world as scary or anxious, then if you do, they will. Even if you don't think you're saying that. It's possible that you are. Is there an alternative to Compro? Yes, you don't have to take it in the chewable. You can take it in a capsule without any of the other stuff in it. Neuropass and cholesterol drugs. There might be some like theoretical reasons why. Have you heard of a contraindication to that? Sometimes St. John's wort will come out as a contraindication. But St. John's wort was one of the biggest studied herbs, like basically in existence. And so a lot of studies were done on that originally. And so there's a huge glut of drug interaction data from St. John's wort because people were all freaked out in the very beginning. It's kind of funny because there was that window of time where everybody said, well, herbal medicine doesn't do anything. And then they were like, well, no, herbal medicine actually creates liver toxicity or creates drug problems. And it's not the drug. So if you're like on avorstatin or something like that, is that what you're on? The info on the cholesterol drugs or the info on the Pasco flare? In Germany, where those things are made, they have legal requirements for listing all of the known data, even if it's not very strong data. So what statin are you on? I can guess, but let's just say it's Lipitor. I'm just looking it up in my drug database right now for you. So the level of evidence for interactions is B. That means there's low quality trials that are showing that it's affecting drug metabolism, which it will. All that means is that you're going to have more of an effect from a statin than otherwise, which actually means you could lower your dose and have the same effect. So if you're not on like a massive dose, it really should be fine. And in fact, you will increase the amount of drug in the system. Okay, so rosuvastatin. Yeah, that's actually even better. So Lipitor, it's quite a bit worse. But this drug actually has even less of a warning. It just says it might increase the metabolism and reduce effectiveness of both, but it will that one will be fine, Peggy. And will I have a list of the herbs? No, but I will have the I'll have the lecture up in a while. Okay, dears, I hope you are having the most awesome night. I hope I didn't miss anybody's question. And I will see you all next month or in the office whenever you come. All right, take care. Thanks for staying late. Apologize for the confusion. Okay, bye.